So welcome to today's Grants and Sponsored Research Initiative, or GRIT seminar, hosted by the Research Program on Children and Adversity at the Boston College School of Social Work. My name is Alethea DeRosiers, and I'm a Research Assistant Professor at Boston College School of Social Work with the Research Program on Children and Adversity. The seminar series was founded as part of the U19 Youth Forward Implementation Science Hub, funded by the National Institute of Mental Health and their global network of U19 scale-up hubs. Our other partners in this work include the Essence and Shine U19 hubs and the University of Rwanda Center for Mental Health. Before I welcome today's speaker, I would like to announce that we have another GRIT seminar coming up on December 14th at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Dr. Eve Puffer from the Duke University Global Health Institute will present on family-centered and community-based approaches to global mental health, meeting children where they are. Also, I would like to announce that there are several PhD and master's level positions open, so please visit the RPCA website and follow us on social media to learn more about our job opportunities and stay updated on our upcoming seminars. Without further ado, I am delighted to introduce today's GRIT speaker, Sunand Bhattacharya, the Vice Provost of Design and Innovation at Boston College. Sunand is a learning architect and an industrial designer who has been spearheading the design and development of BC's first human-centered engineering program. He is also helping to build a culture of collaborative innovation across BC using design-driven methodologies to address real-world challenges. Before returning to academia, Sunand was the global learning strategist for Autodesk, leading its Learning Futures team. In this role, he was responsible for the strategy, management, and evangelization of Autodesk's future influence advocacy in design related to STEM and engineering education. Prior to Autodesk, Sunand was the principal and co-founding partner of Arjuna Learning Designs, a firm specializing in the creation of interactive learning objects to enhance quality of teaching and learning for leading publishing houses. He was a tenured professor of industrial design at Southern Illinois University at Carbondale. Sunand is a recipient of the Innovative Excellence in Teaching, Learning, and Technology Award from the International Conference on College Teaching and Learning. He holds advisory positions at US institutions like Franklin Olin College of Engineering, Purdue University Polytechnic Institute, and Station One, as well as internationally. He serves on the boards of Global Minimum Incorporated, or GMIN, in Kenya, and Agastya, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, International Foundation in India. Sunand received his MDES in Industrial Design from the National Institute of Design in India and holds a terminal graduate degree in Industrial Design and Human Factors from The Ohio State University. It has been my great pleasure to work with Sunand on several projects that integrate design thinking into the development of mental health interventions for vulnerable populations. We are very grateful to have you with us today, Sunand. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alethea. And I'll share my screen. Good morning, everybody.
I think you're on mute still.
I am?
I can hear Sunand fine.
Am I still on mute?
I can hear you, Sunand.
Ah, okay. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Give me 1 second. We can get started. Let me know when you see my full presentation screen. So can you see my screen?
Yep, looks good.
Great, wonderful. Thank you, Alethea. Thank you for that introduction, and really thrilled to be here. I've been with BC about 2.5 years, and I come from both academia as well as the private sector. And I'm going to be covering a lot of ground over here, and I've left about 15 minutes towards the end for discussion. 15, 20 minutes. So I'd like to get started without further ado. So today it's human-centered design, the what, the why, the how, and how these are all threaded. And one of the areas that I am going to focus on is in higher education, our learners who are coming in terms of what they're coming in with, their expectations, and how we as institutions of higher education can exceed their expectations. That's number one. And number two, what we're doing in the School of Social Work, how does that relate to design and design thinking and design-driven initiatives? So I don't need to get into my background. So right across from McGuinn, you have this construction going on right now. And in fall of 2021, this new building will be opening, which will also house some of the design-driven facilities, as well as the engineering programs. It's called the Schiller Institute. The building is going to be called something else. But basically, it's a hub to get people from their own individual silos and departments to be able to collaborate through a well-equipped central hub promoting applied research and collaborative learning experiences, introducing new programs such as engineering, global public health, that are applied in nature and focused on social impact, which is where we wish to connect closely and work closely with the School of Social Work, given all the various integrated science and society work that has already been going on. And the third thing is catalyze a design-driven culture of innovation and built on BC's core values. So BC, has been dabbling with the area of design for quite a while. In 2014, in fact, BC was one of the first institutions to bring in a design firm to look at how its traditional liberal arts curriculum could be positioned to cater to the future, to future students, etc. So fast forward, getting 2018, I joined BC. And there are a couple of things that are on the front burner right now, the engineering program, which I'm going to put aside, and then catalyzing a culture of design and innovation across BC, which I'll talk about, and then get into the relationship it has with the School of Social Work. So I'm talking, by the term design, I don't mean the big D on the left side. What I'm talking about is the little d, which is the process, the verb. And the democratization of that movement, those processes that's taking place these days. The left side is more of becoming an industrial designer, graphic designer, etc. So let's put that aside. And to understand that better, we need to look at trends and indicators. What's happening today, what's happening in the future, and how we will have to reposition ourselves, both as individuals, as people dedicated to solving problems, as well as higher education. So one of the trends that's happening right now is the vocabulary has changed. There are a lot of different terminologies that are becoming a lot more in vogue, that are becoming a lot more in use right now. User-centric design, design thinking, design swarms, human-centered design, co-create, empathy. Some of them are actually pretty germane to the work that you do, but many of these are becoming actually household names right now in K through 12, in students coming into BC, in various different parts of the world, actually. So that's one trend. If you look at history, which is an important factor that kind of helps us predict some of the future trends, and that's one of the things I did in my past life, is looking at historical trends as well as technological trends to see what kind of talent will be required in the future, what kind of educational programs will be needed, and what kind of attitudes people need to have getting out of higher education and going into the workforce. So if you look at this, there's been learning through apprenticeship, and this is more in the context of perhaps object, build space, etc. But I'm going to bring it back into your context in the middle of the presentation. And if you look at current trends, maker entrepreneurs from a young age will become more empowered with cheaper technology. This is already happening. Increasing government support and new channels of distribution. I'll talk a little bit about that in the subsequent slides. And the next generation of students coming in are having a lot more dedication towards socially relevant innovation. So the change in education, secondary as well as post-secondary, is it an option or a necessity? That's a question that we always ask ourselves. It is a necessity, and to better understand the why, we need to look at the current and the future trends. And one of the cardinal rules of any design-driven initiative is the who, the user. and then innovation trends and effects of technological advancements, and what it's doing to our society today. So the who. When we look at the who, our users as BC or as a School of Social Work, I'll tell you a little story over here. Jacob, I've known Jacob now for a few years, and I got to know him when I was at Autodesk. Jacob was at a school called New View Studio in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And Jacob has severe ADHD. Jacob is now a very successful student at Worcester Polytechnic. But at the time when he was 14, he tried to invent something for himself that he could fidget with and focus in school. And he happened to have a father who was an engineer who gave him some tools and the amenities to create prototypes. And one thing led to another, and Jacob created something called GY rings. Then the story didn't stop there. He prototyped it, tested it, and then lo and behold, he decided to go further with the help of his father. He got somebody to manufacture the product. It could be 3D printed, packaged. And fast forward, Jacob has a company. His product is sold at Barnes and Nobles and Target. And Jacob is the inventor of GY rings. This is the next generation of students who are coming in, who are not just solving a problem for themselves, being the users, but they're trying to go in further and become an entrepreneur. And I have another example. And this is the Generation Z that's coming in. So when this is going to become the population with these attitudes, what are we going to be working with in the future? Is something for us to ponder over. And their mindset is quite different from, for example, my own mindset. I mean, I was raised in where the educator, the teacher was in the center, and we didn't have all these other things going on in our learning universe. This Generation Z is actually multitasking. I mean, I say this with a side because my own kids sometimes have their headphones in their ears and they're doing their homework, etc. I don't know how they achieve it, but they do achieve it and they do manage. So that learning universe, that learner coming in to our world, and then this young person, not only in the United States, but this is happening in other parts of the world. So the great thing is students are beginning to learn and question things differently. And that's with the advent of cheaper technologies, mobile phones, etc. And this is in India, the Agastya Foundation. Agastya happens to be the largest foundation in terms of bringing science to the underserved. And they work with BC as well. Our previous president was very much into making and innovation and invention. And these are, again, New View Studio students who had designed a hand-cranked wheelchair, high school students. So it's a very different caliber of high school students that will be coming into BC with expectations. And then here, not just America, but this is Leroy Masaru in Kenya, part of GMIN. Leroy was in a school which had sewer problem and disposal. I mean, it was just going all over the place. And he and a few friends decided to solve that problem and convert the sewage product into a bioreactor and then give them energy. So one thing led to another. Again, just like Jacob, Leroy has today, fast forward, become an entrepreneur with with several people who are part of GMIN and the school. And they have a company called Green Pact that's doing that's being funded by venture capitalists as well as the government to come up with solutions that they are implementing in Africa. And one thing has led to another. Leroy actually has been featured on Huffington Post and Dr. Sanjay Gupta, CNN's program, etc. My point being, this is the next generation of students. These are the mindsets that we are dealing with. And these will be, the bulk of our population in a few years' time. So, and what are they expecting? their expectations of work, from school, etc., is quite different from mine or ours. Um, they want things that are easy to develop, to transfer skills, to share, be engaging in the moment. They get bored pretty easily. They want to practice studio culture of collaboration everywhere, integrate with their work process, use technology with who, where, and how when needed, and be familiar to them. They can walk away also very quickly if it does not engage them. So there are nuances over here in their mindsets and attitudinal things that we should focus upon, not just as an institution of higher education, but also as a population that we will be dealing with, both in humanities, social sciences, science, and the School of Social Work. So, and the boundaries are getting blurred. It's no longer just a single profession. People are coming in with interests and spillovers of being able to be interdisciplinary in nature. And artist is no longer an artist. An artist could be an engineer as well. And that's what we are trying to build upon, because that's going to be tomorrow's classroom, where business, engineering, design, the humanities, social work, all will be working perhaps together to solve problems. Another trend is emerging technologies, innovation. If you look at what's happening, there are several things that are affecting our lives. So when we, for example, in the refugee project in the School of Social Work, we're looking at how can we use mobile technology, WhatsApp, to educate, communicate, and build strategies. So these are a list of similar things that are happening: Internet of Things, cloud collaboration, factory of the future, smart cities, generative design, machine learning, hybrid manufacturing, digital constructions, reality capture. Now, I say all these things. There are also different parts of the world that do not have any of these things. But COVID has actually forced us to depend on online mobile technologies for education. And people are trying to find ways to overcome the obstacles of not having connectivity in many parts of the world. Here's another trend that's happening. It's perhaps a little bit of an exaggeration, but this is truly happening right now, where 57-story towers are coming up in 19 days, where there's multiple collaboration of different disciplines to make it structurally sound, sustainable, as well as taking into account how people interact in some of these kind of high-rise buildings. So again, my point being interdisciplinary collaboration and speed because of technology increasing, that has an impact on all the work that we do, both as community from the mental health point of view, and the haves and the have-nots, and something that we should think about down the line. So these are just a couple of futuristic things that are happening today that are being experimented upon using materials, etc. And then one of the last trends that we'll look at over here is, so what's happening? These 4 areas. There's infinite computing that's coming up, the cloud-based collaboration. You have Google Sheets to everything. Someone can be sitting in Sierra Leone, another person can be sitting here, and we're able to edit a document at the same time. The same thing with, reality, digitized. And then the important thing is young people coming up, being able to use 3D printers or innovate actually across the world. It's no longer just a developed country domain. Things are changing, and amazing complexity. Well, everyone is a designer, so the innate capability to innovate is a very important piece that we need to acknowledge and build upon. In my day, it was on the left side, it was a very linear, sequential story. Now people are able to prototype, refine, go back, and come up with solutions that will work. That's where the designing, we'll be talking a little bit later about designing with rather than designing for. It's very easy to prototype things, but are we truly taking into account the end user? So a lot of junk is coming out also through 3D printing, etc. But that is changing, and people are getting into a lot more, young people are trying to make it a lot more socially relevant. So looking at all that, and also amazing complexity where multiple stakeholders are participating in the development of a solution, rather than what's on the left side where, an innovator, an engineer or a designer would come up with a widget just because that's what the client wanted. And this is today. COVID actually has brought us to real-time collaboration, like what we're doing right now, instant access. We are leveraging these technologies that were there, and now it's a necessity. So seamless integration and collaboration will be very important for us to kind of build upon, which gets into processes, etc. This is not that important, but basically getting into people are trying to innovate faster, work anywhere, and share with anyone. I know the examples over here are a lot more object engineering and product oriented, but I'll take you through also our context in the social sciences, etc. So what is design thinking? This term is used a lot. Design thinking is a structured group process for creatively solving problems, which can be adopted by anyone. So it's agnostic in nature. It's not necessarily married to engineering or design. It's now becoming quite used in actually your school of social work, business schools, engineering, medicine, etc. It's an iterative, collaborative, human-centered approach to understand complex challenges and develop innovative solutions. So as you go through it, why is it, and I'll get into the details of it also. So why is design thinking relevant today? I don't think I need to get into the details of that right now because actually COVID has been a good motivator to kind of to make us realize unintended consequences. What happens if you don't take into account, excuse me, if you don't take the end users into consideration, if you don't take the planet into consideration. So that's, its relevance is pretty self-evident that we need to be looking at not just creating solutions for the short term, but for the long term. And to do that, you need to take the entire process into consideration, which gets into the 5-step process that I'll talk about. So is there a difference between designer and design thinker? Yes, I think I explained that between the big D and the little d in I think the 4th slide. And if there are questions, I can expand on that. So what can design thinking be used for? First of all, being an agnostic process, this can layer on anything, any other existing discipline or process to make that a lot more broader and all-encompassing and holistic. And we've been doing that at BC in various ways. I have a slide that explains that also. So what is human-centered design? This was defined by IDEO, the design firm. Human-centered design is an approach to interactive systems development that aims to make systems usable and useful by focusing on the user, their needs and requirements, and by applying human factors, ergonomics, usability knowledge, and techniques. This approach enhances effectiveness, efficiency, and improves human well-being, user satisfaction, etc. That's pointed out there. And we're trying to use this in some of our projects at the School of Social Work right now. There are a couple of examples that I have that'll be coming up pretty soon. And a few characteristics that can help during a social impact human-centered project is the user-centered sensitivity. It's the heightened sensitivity in terms of being able to listen to them. Community empathy, global outlook, ethics, which is very important for us as a society, as well as for BC, social justice, lead through inspiration and inclusion. Inclusion is the underlying word here. Collaborate to co-create, and storytell to communicate. So as we get into this, the methods of listening and engaging with various different communities is something that you do right now at the School of Social Work. And there are great examples of the work that people like Kelsey and all have been doing in different parts of the world. How? So there are processes such as this one that came out of IDEO and Apple. And the 6-step process, which gets into empathy, empathize. And this is where the kind of the crux of our detail of human-centeredness kind of resides. All these other parts people have been doing for a long time, but with that, not that much attention to the people who are involved, who will be affected by the solutions. And most of the times, we are focused on designing something in a lab or a workshop and bringing it and trying to implement it, rather than getting into their shoes of using it and co-creating with them. That's kind of the crux of our conversation today. And this method has actually been, has become quite popular right now. Many corporations are using it, and now people are beginning to use it in the area of mental health solutions, intervention solutions, and medicine, engineering. And that's what we're trying to kind of inculcate over here as a behavior, as a seamless capability that people can use seamlessly in their disciplines, irrespective of what background they come with. There are also design sprints, quick, agile processes that are being put in place. And these are actually very helpful if you're working with an end user in a different community or culture, and focusing on number one point over here in terms of their needs, their culture, their traditions. And then not doing so also has consequences. And there are a couple of examples that I have over here. So this is becoming quite popular right now as a process. Basically, what happens is through design thinking, it takes you through a when you have that many variables, there's confusion. And through that confusion and iterative process, you can kind of bring about clarity and then design. So people kind of sometimes abandon, ship over here when things are too confusing. But if you have a process, the 6 steps, it kind of helps you get to this point. And we've been using this through a gaming canvas that we've implemented at BC through a course that we introduced in January of 2019. So basically, this kind of walks a student through that process that I showed you, and then provides clarity and goes through alternatives and ideas, etc. So this can actually bring an end user also to collaborate with people who are designing solutions to come up with various different ideas that can then be selected and refined. We've used this now for a year and a half at BC, and we're beginning to see a lot of changes. One is it's become a very popular course. Second part of it is people are asking for the next level. This is introductory. So people are asking for intermediate and mastery level courses as well. The great thing is we're able to listen to students as we make changes. For example, the engineering program, we use this process to hear them out, to talk to their parents as well. It's a collaborative process. It can be messy. You see a lot of these Post-its and Sharpies all around the place. But then I also created this other framework in terms of how, when we get into the kinds of work that we are doing in the School of Social Work, what are the different areas for us to look at? And what should anybody be looking at? The considerations that go beyond just immediately fulfilling the functionality, which is where we kind of get kind of sometimes bogged down, is in the inclusive model. It's important. I mean, we'll be doing it's important for us to get into the co-design, co-creation, and participatory activities to truly understand our user. And the users being, they have their own their nuances from tradition, culture, habits, practices that may be perhaps desirable or undesirable, etc. So that's the user. Then the human-centeredness kind of encompasses that, which gets into the human factors, the physical and psychological needs. The economics and all I'm putting aside for a minute. The humanitarian piece, which is the emotional behavior, traditional cultural practices that we talked about, and the connections between the two. But it's not about humans anymore. It's been exhibited through our current situation. It's about the planet. It's about living things. It's about the connections. And it's about predicting unintended consequences. So as you look at this and we see that, oh, my goodness, when I look at a problem, I have to go through this, I have to take into consideration all these different factors. And then, and that there are blueprints for that in terms of what do we need to look at when we're looking at the human user. For example, it's a project that the School of Social Work has been working on. It's a solar stove project. And it's a good example. There are things of what to do and what not to do, and the consequences that they come up with if you don't take into consideration the human user. So getting into their awareness and literacy level. And literacy does not necessarily mean the literacy we have. It's literacy in terms of awareness of what is out there, if they understand the consequences of the problems or not. The habits, beliefs, culture, traditions, understanding those pieces. Implementation. We cannot implement something if people don't own it. Co-designing helps a lot when people have a skin in the game. And of course, the work that you do right now in the School of Social Work is looking at the use and the results, the intended change, and how those are measured. So those strategies and methods kind of follow some of the design thinking, the 6-step processes over here. So it's important to have a strategy in terms of how you'll be approaching the project, and then getting into what kind of methods would you use to capture input related to the human end user, and then also look at the other layers of sub consequences in terms of what happens if you don't take those into consideration. So here's some stories. So say, for example, I cannot name the engineering school over here, but many engineering schools have been trying to solve the problem of firewood, cooking with firewood. And in fact, your dean has a great book on this whole thing. And so there was one engineering school that went in to help reduce indoor pollution, air pollution in the huts, and came up with a very nice chimney. Built this whole thing, left, came back after a year. And they saw that people had stuffed newspapers all over the roof where there were openings and the chimney. So upon being asked, they found out that, they were told that if there's any opening in the roof, it kind of lets evil spirits come in. So here is something where the engineering school went in thinking creating a chimney would solve the problem. By the same token, they did not take into consideration what happens if you do have an opening on the roof. And again, not taking into account the end user. Here's a success story from the School of Social Work that BC School of Social Work, Dr. Praveen Kumar has been working with the Indian Institute of Technology. And they worked on, the success story was they went to, based on what the Indian government wanted, they went in with the Indian Institute of Technology to work with solar lamps. And they took into account all the different variables right from the get-go. They also took into account, they applied implementation science and user-centered design solutions, taking into account the end user, and created a whole infrastructure industry, which has not just the lamp or the light, but it also has the servicing of it. It's got the whole chain of events of if once the lamp breaks down, what happens. And they've empowered women with these economic benefits, as well as an opportunity to bring themselves out of the economic situations they are in currently. It's a great success story in terms of taking into account the end user, what would work, what wouldn't work, and creating a multi-pronged holistic solution. There's also a different story of what not to do. So say, for example, the Indian government, again, with the collaboration of Indian Institute of Technology, and BC's also been a part of, has gotten into it, wanted to implement solar stoves. So a bunch of engineers went in and came up with induction cook stoves. And I think you see this big battery over here, which occupies, quite a bit of space in their limited small huts. So that was kind of the solution they thought, again, designed for, not with, and not taking into consideration how people cook. So say, for example, in India, people use woks, the round-bottomed pots. And an induction stove cannot take round bottom. It has to be flat. It has to have a certain material for the heat to transfer. And then they decided to put these solar panels right outside their huts. Again, without taking into consideration anything about the end user. And several of these were implemented and tested. And then I think right now the question is, why aren't they using it to the extent that they had envisaged or planned for? So that's an example of not taking into account end users right from the get-go and understanding them truly, the model that I was trying to show you earlier. So the framework. So this is something that BC will be helping the Indian Institute of Technology to relook at from a design point of view. So it's a great story in terms of what to do and what not to do. Here's actually another great success story. This is a BC graduate who who's a pediatrician who's created this thing called a Billy Hut. The Billy Hut is something that has the blue light to help neonatal jaundice treatment. And in parts of the world, that is something where a lot of newborns don't ever receive, about 6 million, don't receive treatment. So she's come up with this solution, which it actually folds and kind of gets into your backpack. And she worked closely with people from Vietnam and Bangladesh to come up with a light, highly foldable, inexpensive shipment, robust material, unique design that improves babies' thermoregulation, battery-powered option for a variety of settings. But her name is Donna Brzezinski. Donna is a pediatrician at Brigham and Women's Hospital. And she was given a fellowship by Mass Challenge as well as Autodesk. That's how I got to know her. And she had a group of social scientists, engineers, designers working together to create this solution over here. So it's become a very successful solution today. And again, Donna, being a graduate of BC, we are very proud of this story. There are resources out there. There are several books and kits out there that you can access to learn more about these. And so what are we doing at BC? I have 2 minutes left. I'll just walk you through this. So BC, as we know, if you put a grid, we have these neat little buildings and you can put a grid over it and great departments all over the campus. What we don't do perhaps effectively that we can perhaps notch up is collaborate and build on each other's strengths. So that's what the Schiller Institute, as well as other initiatives we're trying to bring upon, the whole design thinking initiative. How can people collaborate and create solutions which are holistic in nature? So BC's fundamental, liberal arts foundation is a very strong one as opposed to many other institutions. Ethics, reflection, the core. And what we're trying to do is put this whole process, this methodology of design thinking, prototyping, etc., on to strengthen the liberal arts foundation, not instead. The goal is that there'll be more collaborative projects throughout campus, and we'll create new programs using the same scaffolding and model. So that's what we're trying to kind of put in place right now. In 2018, when we started, we had a blank canvas and we had about 2 years to look at what are we going to do by 2021 and beyond to catalyze this culture of design and innovation. So what we did was in 2019, started introducing new courses, design swarms and hackathons. There have been multiple of hackathons on campus, speaker series, storytelling, fireside workshop. And we actually showcased projects from the School of Social Work, because School of Social Work has been ahead of many of the schools at BC in terms of implementing human-centered inclusive design processes for a while using implementation science. So as a student goes through, a future student goes through BC, whether they're engineering students or they're from a different major, we want them to benefit from all these investments we are making so that the future student coming out will have both this ability to think from a design thinking point of view, ideate, and prototype. The engineering program has been, based on this particular principle, and we use the methodology to create the engineering program called human-centered engineering. We looked at what will be needed in 2025. What will this young person be capable of bringing to the world, given that so many different engineering schools reside all around this person? And so in looking at that, we started working backwards. We know that the student has to have strong engineering capabilities, the fundamentals. But how do we marry that with all the other things that BC brings to the table, from storytelling, communication, to ethics, to be able to practice human-centered design, so that the future employer and industry is able to benefit from this person who's graduating in 2025 with these capabilities, and not just the engineering formulas and the capabilities that most engineering schools bring up. So that's the differentiator that we're trying to bring to the world. And to do that, we kind of went through a pretty extensive process of validation to bring about to confirm what we wanted to achieve or what we wish to achieve in the future. And that has led to a program which has a core, the engineering core, of course, which also has liberal arts woven through it, and the design and systems thinking as another essential component. And then these other streams kind of go through it, like threads, reflection, concentrations, emerging technologies, the theme of health, energy, and environment. So that's kind of what kind of engineering program that we're trying to create. And we hope to create other programs that are using this methodology. So towards the end of this presentation, some questions. Are we in higher education ready to embrace the shifting mindsets of the next generation, the who, the new trends in innovation, the effects of technological advancements, and designing responsibly for a better planet and society? And that gets into our world over here, is what do these shifts really mean for us, both as a School of Social Work, in terms of what we're trying to do to make a difference in the world, and in education. So, and all these things cannot be done without thinking. So we need to be designing responsibly, using these processes responsibly to look at unintended consequences and look at life-centered design for a better planet, designing for social justice and focusing on unintended consequences I mentioned. So radical collaboration with design, by design, for the future of making and learning. And on that note, I'll stop here for questions. We have a lot of great opportunities on the horizon, given the challenges we are facing today. And I think it personally energizes me in terms of the possibilities that are there for us. So I have a few videos that I can share with Tesla that can be distributed. But on that note, I want to stop sharing. And we have about 14 minutes for questions.
Great, thank you, Sunand. If anyone in the audience has a question, please feel free to either unmute yourself or type your question into the chat. In the meantime, we also received a few questions beforehand.
Oh, it's in the chat?
Yeah, so maybe we can start with those.
Okay, so how to balance evidence-based interventions with human-centered design? How do these disciples relate or influence each other? What are some helpful strategies and principles to employ for conducting human-centered research and collaboration while working remotely? So, great question. So let me answer the second one first. What are helpful strategies and principles to employ? Actually, the internet has a lot of resources right now in terms of providing overviews of what this process truly means with examples. It's very important to look at case study examples of how these processes have been applied. The slide that shows resources, for example, IDEO, IDEO, has a toolkit that has these processes in it. So you can look that over. There's several other companies also that are coming up with processes. So if you just Google human-centered design, TED, there's some TED Talks there. There's one very good one by Don Norman, who's kind of the guru of design thinking. So those processes, along with working remotely, I think remotely people are able to do a lot more than they ever thought. So platforms like this, where we're able to connect through Zoom at the drop of a hat without having to travel, is bringing, on one level, it's bringing a lot of people closer in terms of collaborating. The framework that I kind of showed you, or there are several frameworks that are out there that you'll be able to find. And then the second part of it is, how does evidence-based interventions with human-centered design. So this is actually where the work that you're doing, and remember in one of those framework I had showing results and measuring it. A lot of design work that goes on perhaps does not get into having metrics to measure impact. How you create these metrics is very important, because some are very numerical in nature, but when you get into qualitative aspects of it, one needs to make sure that you are taking into account some of the behaviors and other things, which all of you do. So how do you relate that to HCD is one of the things that opportunities that I see is being able to create solutions using participatory methods with end users, rather than coming up with solutions for them and then measuring those and having them part of the entire process, a sample. Okay, there's another one over here, how to balance HCD and ontological design, how to anticipate the negative outcomes of developing a new technology. Well, that's a great question, and I don't think anybody has an answer, Lucas, but I think a complete answer, but attempting to look at the pros and cons a little bit more in detail, just like we had in that framework, is something we need to do. We don't do enough of that. So for example, I work for a software company, technology company, and a Wall Street company. Towards the end of the quarter for earnings release, all bets are off and people kind of scramble to make some things happen rather than stay true to looking at unintended consequences and doing something about it. So education is probably the bottom line. If we are able to do a better job with the next generation coming in, we can probably have a better chance of benefiting from predicting negative consequences. Tommy, how can organizations that serve frontline youth in K through 12 overcome the many barriers to accessing resources for exploration, collaboration, tech trainings, cost, social constraints, and integrate design thinking into their services to promote creatively and innovation in frontline youth? So this actually has been, Global Minimum, the organization that I'm part of, has a couple of places, one in Sierra Leone and one in Kenya. And not everything is governed by just technology, but the innate creativity and innovation that people have, sometimes without technology, is also very important. If one can show a method in terms of how you can truly innovate something by taking into consideration some of the far-reaching consequences and coming up with a solution to solve for your own needs by defining it. That can be done without extensive technology. But the point is, we do need to be able to overcome the tech barriers that are there right now. When mobile phones are kind of becoming one of the methods, but it's changing every day. And the governments are also beginning to invest in these from various different countries, even the most remotest ones. What would the strategies to create solutions with involving users in situations like COVID-19 working remotely? Again, bringing together people using methods like Zoom. So we're doing that right now in a course at BC called ERA, where there are certain tools that are being, like Mural, that are being used and provided to end users to come in and engage remotely. Now, so say, for example, if you're dealing with homelessness, you may not be able to get people, the homeless person, to be able to be involved in remotely coming up with a participatory solution. That's the downside. But for the people who do have remote opportunities, I think we can do a lot with that. We're dealing with, in the ERA course, something to do with COVID, how seniors overcome isolation. And the remote tools have been working quite well in that. Giving suggestions for training opportunities for the faculty. Yeah, there are several, Maggie. I can offline kind of provide those answers in terms of what kind of training opportunities one can benefit from. A couple of your colleagues are actually taking a course, Jenna, Brent, and Candace, through a couple of online courses that they're taking in design thinking. Lucas, can you share your email? Sure, Lucas. Actually, Tesla has my email. It's sunand.bhattacharya@bc.edu. Okay, so those are the questions here. Any discussions? Would people like to contribute and start something that I can learn from? I covered a lot of ground over here. I realized that.
Sunand, I just wanted to take a minute to thank you for this great presentation and joining us today as well. I was wondering if some people who have joined in today would be interested in hearing just a little bit about the work that you've been doing with Jenna and the refugee team on the co-creation process with the family-facing app. I wonder if just a few lines about that might be helpful to get a sense of how the human-centered design is being sort of applied to evidence-based mental health and with a vulnerable population.
Sure. So one of the reasons why I'm involved is I think we have a great opportunity at BC. As you see, this whole human-centered design and design thinking getting democratized. When you get into an area like the project that BC is working on, the refugee project that BC is working on, it's too many times we come up with solutions and then we try to implement and expect people to react and provide input. But if they don't have a skin in the game, they don't own it. So that's one of the understandings that we have and the assumptions that we have is, can we get the end user group whose literacy level is different from ours, the Somalian refugees, for example, and get them to kind of help design and own the family intervention initiative that BC is trying to implement. So in that, it's not that the content is one part and BC's got the whole, what kind of intervention it should be. But do we know that they will understand it the way, the spirit of, and kind of in the spirit of what we had put in place in the first place? Or is it going to be something to which people will say yes or no? So our goal was to is to get into designing methods in which they are participating and owning it, so that if you're able to get them to identify, whether it's through videos and icons, and help design those that they understand. So in doing so, we are looking at, for the visuals, for example, we are looking at everything from skin color, culture, and things that, images that resonate with their background and literacy. Because sometimes the assumptions we make over here versus how they think are quite different. So if we can take this methodology and get them to participate in creating a solution, our goal is to then use that process for other projects where we can demonstrate how in intervention projects or other mental health related projects, can we bring, to the extent possible, people to own and participate. So in doing that, we have also created a couple of parallels that we've been talking about. One is what things resonate with somebody who is, let's say, a grandmother or mother in that family. Cooking is one of them. Gardening or growing your food is another one. So we've been using that as a metaphor and trying to get people to own that, to grow, the food that you need. Now, take that and draw a parallel to anything that you do and you work together and own is something that will bring about success. So those are some of the methods and processes that we have been thinking about implementing. I think very soon we will be having a focus group, a participatory focus group, where people will be giving suggestions on what kind of icons and visuals we need from their point, rather than us designing something and taking it to them. So I'm really excited about the project. The goal is that it'll have better success, and we'll have to measure that over time, of course.
Thanks, Sunand. I think that's really helpful as a grounding example of how to merge these processes. Tesla, are there any other questions? It looks like we're just about out of time for today.
Yes, it looks like we don't have any additional questions, but thank you so much, Sunand, for your time and this great presentation. I will send more information to everyone who participated today, and if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to the lab.
Great, thank you so much for having me. I know I covered a lot of ground, but I hope there's some framework that you can take away. And if you need any more processes and all, I'm happy to share those.
Thanks so much, Sunand. Thanks everyone for joining.
Goodbye.
Take care.